Good evening and welcome to Let's Study the Word. In Let's Study the Word, we take a scripture and we break it down. We go into it to find the word, the Logos word, the Rhema word that God will give to us for a week. I'm your host, Minister Dr. Karen Cowell, and this week our journey into the Word took us to Exodus chapter 14, verses 1 to 4, and verses 8 to 19. And the topic is Move Forward. And the children of Israel are on the cusp or the verge of a transitioning. The process of transitioning is shifting from one state to another, and it's never an easy process. Parents experience it when children move from the baby to the toddler stage and they need a baby or a toddler. And in this stage known as the terrible twos, it's one where people feel like pulling out their hair because you just don't know what to do. Then it doesn't end there because in the teen years, they are transitioning from child to young adult. And one more time, it feels like you're going crazy because in this process, there's hormones changing, there's physical body changing, and they're learning to become young adults, moving to become productive members of society, with many of them for the first time gaining a level of freedom that they have never enjoyed before. So we have to understand that transitioning is never really an easy process. If you think about the process of a tree becoming a piece of furniture, then you have to understand the process from the point of view of the tree. First, it's cut and transported. Then the limbs are removed. Then there is the bark. Think about it. It has to cut the tree. Then you have to take the bark and sand it off. And then after you sand off the bark and you think, okay, the process is over. Oh no, they have to then cut the tree again. And this time when you're cutting the tree, you're putting it into pieces that the carpenter can use. The carpenter then has to take this tree, the pieces of lumber that remains of the tree, and the carpenter has to join the pieces back together with glue and with whatever materials that they're using. And when they do this joining of the material back together, they then paint it or stain it, and it becomes this beautiful piece of furniture when you look at it. But the tree had to pay a price. The price of the cutting, the price of the removals, the price of the sawing, the price of the sanding, the price of the staining. The tree paid a price. Now, for Israel, there was a price to be paid. As they stood on this threshold, this move from slavery into freedom, just as how the tree paid a price, so too Israel paid a price. Let's think about it for a moment. Israel, the person now, and 66 persons went down to Egypt to live with Joseph and his two sons. This makes for a total of about 70 Israelites who are living in this foreign land. And at some point after the death of Joseph and Pharaoh, who knows the Israelites, Exodus 1 verse 8 to 14 tells us that a new king came to power. And to this king, Joseph was nobody. He never heard of Joseph. And so he said to the Israelites, to the people, sorry, the Israelites have become far too numerous for us. Come, we must deal with them shrewdly, or they'll become even more numerous. And if war breaks out, they will join our enemies, they will fight against us, they will leave the country, and we will suffer. So let's put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor and let them build our cities. And so that's what that Pharaoh did. But the scripture tells us that the more the people were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites, and basically they worked them ruthlessly. They made their lives bitter. They were harsh with them. They gave them brick and mortar to build all these fabulous cities of Ramesses and Pithon so that they would weaken them. But when God is in the picture, he will transition. So over the next 430 years, they transition from a family to a nation. And during this period of transitioning, they're feared and they're hated. And a point of note is that not everybody is going to celebrate your transitioning experience. Not everybody is going to view your growth as a point to celebrate and to say, hallelujah, you're becoming who we want you to be. Not everybody is going to see that. Instead, what will happen is, like Joseph's brother feared his growth, and the Pharisees feared Christ and what he was seeking to effect change in, people may fear you. People may hate you. People may even seek to kill you. Think about it. When Christ sought to transition Judaism from a religion for only one nation and one people to a religion that would draw the world to it, where he was the savior, the Pharisees and the Sadducees saw this as a detriment to what they knew and sought to kill him. Understand, your own transitioning process will be examined, sometimes misunderstood, and you may even be hated, but move forward and complete the process. We're talking about transitioning. Have you had a process in your life? Have you been required to transition in your own life? Think about it. What area are you in right now as you are waiting to move to the next level? Let's talk a bit. We mentioned that 70 persons entered into Egypt. 400 years later, 430 to be specific, it said that it is over 2.4 million persons. We know this because Numbers 1 verse 46 says 600 men left Egypt, and using the typical scale of 3 to 1, 600 times 3, 1,800 women and children, add that back to the 600,000 men, you're at 2.4 million. And these people have used and heard the oral traditions of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But for them, he was a silent God. They may have kept the commands of doing circumcision, but as they cried out to him, as they sought to get, release from their situation, as they asked God to end this transitioning process, as they sought to God to say, this is too painful, the sanding is too much, the cutting is too much, God was silent. So when Moses returns with the news to them that they're about to be delivered, they're fearful. First of all, they don't know or they don't understand the power of this Yahweh God. And in fact, the closest they had come to seeing religion and worship was the Egyptians' way of worship, which, if you think about it, it would explain why they would build a golden calf when they're caught in the wilderness later on, and they think that Moses is dead. This is what they knew. So in order to get the elders to even believe, Moses had to show them signs that God told him to show them so that they would say, yes, it is really a deliverance from God. What were the signs? Well, the rod that became a snake, the leprous hand that became clean, the water coming out of the Nile and turning into blood. He had to show that to the elders first. Did you know that? The Israelites are no different than people today. Even if you think about back in the days of Jesus in St. John chapter 4 and about verse 48, the scripture tells us, unless you people see signs and wonders, you never believe. Back to John 20, about verse 29, the second part of John 20, verse 29. Jesus said, when Thomas says, I can't believe that this is you that have returned. Jesus says, yes, it's me. Put your hand in my side, touch the wounds. But blessed are those who have not seen but believe. Blessed are those who have not seen but believe. That's the word that God will give to his people when you're going through the transitioning process. How awesome it is while you're being rubbed while you're being cut, while you're being changed from one state to another, that you may not hear God. You may not know for sure if he's really there, but you believe. The transitioning process is new and it can be exhilarating and heart-pounding. Think about somebody who is waiting with a parachute strapped to their back for the first time and they're about to jump out of a plane home thousands of feet in the air. Or somebody who is crazy enough to go on a cliff and jump off because they're bungee jumping. And they're not sure if they're about to live or to die. The transitioning process, as you come to the end of it, feels like your heart is racing because you're not sure how. You have that expectation. You know something is coming, but you're not sure. You can't see. You're not there until you jump. In the upcoming weeks, we're going to go into more details about the journey as they went through the plagues with Pharaoh, and we're going to talk about the whole matter of Passover and so on. But for tonight, let's just move on. At this point, all the plagues have happened. They've been given by Pharaoh to go worship in the wilderness. They have borrowed the silver and gold as instructed by God. Yeah, God told them, yeah, go to the Egyptians and borrow their silver and gold. And when you borrow their silver and gold, put it on your children. That's what God told them. And so they have done all of this. And after doing all of this, they have left all that is familiar behind them. They have left what is the pain of their past, and they're given the symbols of their future, symbols that talk to the power and the signs that show that God was with them. Because in front of them, by day, was a pillar of clouds, and by night, it was a pillar of fire. And this sign leads them from Sukkot to Etham. Now, I don't know about you, but like the children of Israel, God confuses me sometimes. I'm not going to lie to you. God confuses me sometimes. Why do I say that? Exodus 14, we just looked at it, verse 2 to 3. God says to the Israelites, after 3 days' journey, I want you to do something that is not what you would expect. Geographically, you could have gone by the way of the Red Sea into the desert, and you would have gone east. And if you had gone east, the sea would be on your right-hand side. You're already on the borders of the desert, and so a short march, just a little journey, would have taken them out of the reach of the Egyptians who would have been pursuing them, because the chariots would not have made good progress in the desert. But instead of doing the easy thing, instead of taking the simple route, instead of going the way man's thought pattern would work, God says to them, swerve to the south. Huh? Put the Gulf on your left. And yes, I know this is going to keep you in the reach of Egypt. And yes, I know if you look at it, the promise of the land that I've given you is now behind you. But this is how I want you to go. God, that's crazy. The promise is finally in reach. We have suffered for 430 years. We have finally gotten this close. We're to turn back south instead of east. It's a move that makes absolutely no sense to the natural mind. And sometimes as we transition, the route which God carries us does not seem to make any sense at all. Think about Joseph as a journey to the palace where he could become a change maker for his people. First carried him on a slave market road to a slave market to house of a man whose wife would try to take his dignity, allow him to commit adultery, turn him from being a man of integrity, rob him from his dream. And then because he stood up for all that he believed in, he'll be thrown in a prison. God, are you sure this is the road? I mean, come on, God. I mean, think about it. Sometimes a journey to find the right person who you're going to spend the rest of your life with, you had to go through 2 or 3 persons who ripped your heart from out of your body and seemingly like they stomped on it. And you had to learn those lessons before you finally found someone who appreciated you and loved you. God, why couldn't I just found him first? God, I don't understand why my body has to fail me so many times before. We're talking about transitioning. And we're mentioning the fact that as you transition, sometimes God carries you through some circumstances and some situations during the process. It hurts. The cutting hurts. The pain hurts. And then still, he carries you to the point that makes no sense and detours you in ways that makes no sense to your mind, to my mind, but for his glory. So this directive that they've gotten now there at Etham, it's not only unexpected, it's worrisome. And God conceals the reason. Have you ever noticed when you're going through your stages of transitioning, God conceals his rationale and his reason? The periods in our lives when God sends us out but gives no explanation are the scariest. Think about Abraham. Go to a land that I will show you. But in looking back, we can see objective in what God would send us out to do. We can understand the rationale later on. The problem is we want to see the rationale now. If only I had known, I would have been quiet. I would have just gone through the process. I would have taken the process easy. I would have just rested in the process. But that's what God asked us to do. Rest and trust him, even while his objective is unfolding. What was the objective at this point? The objective at this point was to allow Pharaoh to pursue them. Does that make sense? Pharaoh, who is pursuing you, I must sit back and allow him? Yes, because God had a plan for Pharaoh and his army. He wanted Pharaoh and his army to know his glory. The plan was not just for Israel, the plan was for Israel and for the Egyptians. We're talking about transitioning. We're talking about going through a period in your life when you're moving from one stage to the other. And we're talking about especially as you go through those periods and God remains silent. When he does not give us the rationale, when he doesn't tell us how we are going to escape, when he doesn't tell us how we're going to get from one side to the other, keep moving. Pharaoh saw Israel being trapped by the mountain chains and the sea. And so in his mind, if he pursues them from the rear, escape is impossible. But God's plan was so that Pharaoh in his pursuit would be blinded to the possibility of the El Shaddai God. Now, as we come to this point, there's a feeling of power that you start out with. Exodus 14 verse 8 tells us the children of Israel went out with a high hand. Underline that, because what it means is that they came out confident. They came out feeling victorious. But in every transitioning period comes the point of fear. When the opposition seems to rise to a level that you can't even explain, it seems to increase exponentially as Pharaoh and his army closes in, not only with his regular chariots, but with his chosen chariots. And in that moment, the miracles of the rod, the miracle of the hand, the miracle of the blood from the Nile, all the plagues are forgotten compared to the sight of these thousands of chariots that are approaching you at full speed. This was what Israel saw when they looked. What are the lessons to be learned from this story taken in Exodus chapter 14? First lesson, God's purpose lies in the midst of your circumstances. Let me say that again. God's purpose lies in the midst of your circumstances. Jeremiah 29 verse 11 assures you, for I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future. We have to come to the understanding that nothing catches God by surprise. While you're busy looking at the tree trying to figure out how this tree is blocking your way, God is seeing the forest. He knows the path. He knows how to carry you through from one side to the other. And the process and the purpose are synonymous. Let me say that again. The process you're going through and the purpose that you're going through, why you're going through, they're synonymous. Everything in life has to be processed to become what it was intended. From that example that we gave of the lumber becoming furniture, to the embryo who becomes a baby, or the child to a man, life is about processing and transitioning. And the answer to your purpose lies squarely in the midst of your process. We can't compare the process each of us undergoes because your process is related to your purpose. Think about it. Under pressure, only coal becomes a diamond. Grapes will become juice. Paul the Apostle in 2 Corinthians about chapter 11 tells us that he had been beaten 5 times. And it's not just any light beating. We're talking about the cattle whips, 39 stripes on each occasion. He had been imprisoned many times, shipwrecked 3 times. He spent 1 whole day and night in the middle of the sea. We're not talking on a ship. We mean in the waters with the waves beating him to and fro. He was beaten with the rods 3 times. He was stoned once. In danger from robbers, in danger from Jews, in danger from Gentiles. Yes, everybody tried to kill him. And as he traveled establishing churches, preaching the gospel of Jesus crucified and resurrected, in pain, hungry, thirsty, and naked. He went through all of this with a thorn in his flesh. 2 Corinthians 12, about verse 6 to 7. You're going through your process, and God, that's not enough. You too are giving me a thorn in the flesh. God, can't you remove it? 3 times he asked God. God says, no. No. As I go through this process, as I go through these circumstances, and you can't take it away, you're telling me no? No. God says, my grace is sufficient to keep you while you're going through it. What's the purpose of all that then, Jesus? What's the purpose of the beating? What's the purpose of the shipwreck? What's the purpose of the prison? Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 1, so that I may gain vision and revelation and be kept humble. So that I may gain vision and revelation so that I may be kept humble. What's the purpose of the process you're going through? What's the lesson that you need to learn to complete this phase of your life? What's the test? You've got to understand what's the test, because the answer to your purpose, the answer of your testimony lays in the test. Recently, I read an article about a young woman here from Jamaica who lived in a foreign land attending college, and being Negro, she could find no products to suit her here. So on her vacations, when she came home, she found ways to create products to package and carry back with her to college. She had a problem and she had a process. What happened out of the problem and the process? When she graduated school, she had a hair product line that was already established, tested, and tried. God's purpose lay in the midst of the problem. Friends, as you're at this position, this brink of change, as you start to feel the excitement in your spirit that change is coming, something is about to take place, don't become caught up with who is trying to stop your progress. Don't become caught up with who is moving ahead. Don't become caught up with the problems. See the lessons that must be learned, so that when you get over to the other side, so that when you get the promise, you're armed with the knowledge and you're ready to stand. Find the purpose for which you're transitioning and live it. Lesson 1, it's time to move. Let me say that again. It's time to move. This brings us to lesson 2. What's the second lesson as we read that scripture in Exodus chapter 14? What's the second lesson that we can learn? Don't let your past hinder your future. Let me say it again. Don't let your past hinder your future. Now, there are some of us Christians, we are baptized, we dress the part, we talk the part, we try to walk the part, but truthfully inside we are hurting people filled with pain of past experiences that have not been dealt with. The truth is that many church leaders offer counseling to couples about to be married or families in crisis. But when we look at our congregants, we see them smiling and singing on the choirs and praying and preaching, and we think they're all right. But instead, they're really nicely dressed, singing, praying, hurting people who are not whole. Christianity calls the broken and the hurting, but the passion of Christ has always been to make us whole. And the problem we face is that we come broken, hurting, in pain, and we put on the facade pretending that all is well, and we don't deal with the issues of our past. The marriage that failed, the relationships that failed, the parents that you feel failed you, the boss that failed you, the job that failed you, all the things that you consider failures that chipped away at your ego, yourself, at your personality, all the things that let you feel incomplete. The result is that we're in a church, a building filled with people who, truthfully, are wounded soldiers who are dying. And when you're in the transitioning process and you're wounded and you're hurting and the past is still this close, sometimes you can't see the power of God at work. Think about it. Here it is, the children of Israel, still remembering the whips that had just beaten them a couple weeks ago, still remembering 430 years, generation after generation being taken advantage of. Here they are on this verge of moving forward, and then they're feeling so mighty and powerful, and before them is the glory of God, and behind them is the glory of God, a pillar of clouds and a pillar of fire, showing the presence of Jehovah Jireh, the covenant-keeping God, the God who leads. But instead of seeing that, all they see are the chariots and the horsemen of Egypt. All they see is their past, running them down, seeking to overtake them, seeking to carry them back. And so it hinders them. It slows them down, and their mindset starts to change. Why did you bring us out here to die? Why didn't you just let us die in Egypt? Is it that Egypt didn't have enough graves? Listening on a conversation of someone transitioning, moving from single to being married, moving from broken relationships to finally finding a man who they believe they love, a man they believe they can spend the rest of their life with. And then in the first year of their marriage, the first things that come out when there are issues is, boy, you stay just like. Bringing the past into the present, being hindered by the past. Left broken, hurting by a relationship, having the offspring of that relationship and looking at the child but never really seeing the child because all you can see is the man. We're talking about transitioning. We're talking about trying to get to the point of change, trying to get to the other side, but being hindered by your past. St. Matthew chapter 14, verse 22 to about verse 26. Peter, as long as he kept his eyes on Jesus, was able to walk on water. What purpose was he walking on water? Because he said to Jesus, bid me to come. Just like how we say to Jesus, tell us to come. And Jesus says, come. Come, all ye who are heavy laden, I will give you rest. Take my yoke and my burden. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And so we go. We go walking on water. But the moment you take your eyes off Jesus, just like Peter, the moment you look at the circumstances, what is the circumstances? He's standing on an impossible surface. Water was never made for walking. And so his mind now conceives in itself that what you're doing is impossible. But think about this. He has been walking on water since he stepped out of the boat. So what was impossible with God was possible as long as he kept his eyes on Jesus. Also now think about, why did Jesus come walking to them on water? Why did Jesus have to come to them in this manner? He had sent them to go over the other side while he remained behind to dismiss the crowd and then to go pray. But then in the night, a storm arose on the lake and the wind started to batter and buffet the boat. And so he decided to go walking on water in the storm to save them. Understand that God is walking into the battering and the beating, saying to you, I'm coming. When Peter remembered that the reason why they were so afraid was that there is a storm. Up to this point, he didn't remember there was a storm. First, he saw, what am I doing? I'm walking on water. Takes his eyes off Jesus. But then, it's not just that I'm walking on water, but I'm walking on water in the midst of a storm, and the waves and the wind are beating me. Suddenly, his past became a hindrance to what God wanted to do with him. Have God been trying to do something with you? Have God been saying something to you, but your past is a hindrance? Has God been trying to get you to the next level, but you're looking and saying, God, this is impossible. And then God, it's not only impossible, but remember, friends, the first thing when we come to God, we have to ask him to make us whole. We have to ask him to help us get over the past hurts and the pains. We have to let go of the self-image we have of ourselves and commit to God that we are going to allow him to make us into his own design. We have to move beyond the process that had brought us here and focus on the instructions that God has given us about where he's taking us. You've got to keep your eyes on the pillar of cloud. You've got to keep your eyes on the fire. You've got to keep your eyes on Jesus and forget about what is seemingly possible or impossible. Because Elohim God, the all-powerful God, is also the covenant-keeping God. And he will keep his promises. He's a God who keeps his word. As I prepared for this message, I saw in my mind a picture of a racehorse. And on the side of its face are these flaps, which they call blinkers. The Lord said, research it. And so in looking up, I found out that these blinkers causes the horse to become more focused because it cannot see its opponent on either side. Instead, it focuses only on what is directly before it. They found that having the blinkers on the horse made it go that much faster. The Lord is saying to some of us today that we need to do something about the process we are in. For some of us, the process has been going on too long because every time God has taken us to FM, every time we're about to be transitioned from one state to another, every time he says, come, and we step out of the boat, we become distracted by life and its circumstances. We need to start asking God for some spiritual blinkers. Yeah, where we keep our eyes on where we need to keep our eyes instead of looking at everything else. This leads us to our third and final lesson from the passage tonight. And it's found in verses 13 to 15. Moses has been encouraging the people and says, stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. For the Egyptians you see today, you will see them no more. Stand still, for the Lord shall fight for you. But in his heart, he has been crying out to God. God, what are you doing? Where are you? God, the mountains are on either side. The sea is in front of us. God, you told me to do this. How do I know all of this? Because God answers when he says in verse 13, why are you crying unto me? Speak to the children of Israel that they go forward. So he wasn't speaking to Israel, he was speaking to Moses. Why are you, Moses, crying? I already told you what the process was going to be. Go forward. But God, there's only the sea. Use what's in your hand. Use what's in you. Use the gifts and the talents that I have given you. Use what has been installed and processed and transitioned in you to remove what's stopping you from transitioning. Moses, what's in your hand? A rod? Stretch it out, and the way will be made for you. What's in you? What are the gifts and talents in your hands? What's in your heart? What's the dream? What's the desire? And you've got to know when the process is complete and it's time to move forward. Nobody can tell you when your process is ended. Think about it. When cane is harvested and it's washed and it's chopped and it's milled, they take out from it water and sugar juice. Now, the water and the sugar juice is boiled together and it produces brown sugar. Brown sugar is a product of its own. Some people are brown sugar. That's where your processing ends, and that's where you need to get out. That's the stage you need to come out at. Some persons have to be further refined and become white sugar. That's the stage. You've got to stay a little longer in the processing. Some persons, after the sugar is boiled, there is something that's left behind, a thick byproduct that is known as molasses. Some of us are molasses. We've got to stay in the boiling pot until it's time to be fermented. And when we're fermenting and we're distilled, we are used to make rum. And there are different types and stages of rum because different things are added to it, different additives and different lengths of fermentation, different length to the process. But are you molasses or are you rum? Are you brown sugar or are you white sugar? And some of us are no sugar, no rum. Some of us are the bagasse, the residue that's used to make board and paper and lumber. But all of this comes out of the process. Different stages. What are you? And where are you in the process? If you are sugar and you go all the way down to rum, then you have moved away from your purpose, from what you should have learned in the process. You have sat back and built house. Notice God never told the children of Israel to build one house while they were traveling in the wilderness. Not one. They used tents. Even the tent of meeting, which represented the place, the temple, where they're to meet with God, was not a permanent structure. David says, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Move forward. You're in your transitioning period. If it's time to get out, get out. If it's time to continue because you still have some way to go, you still have some rubbing down to do, stop standing still. Move forward. What are you? What did God tell you? Stop crying. Stop lamenting. Hold to the word that God has given you and move forward. I just want to encourage you this evening. As you transition from stage to stage, as you walk through this journey, remember the lessons for tonight. God's purpose lies in the midst of your circumstances. You don't know your purpose? Look at your circumstances. The answer can be found right there. The testimony comes out of the test. Secondly, as you're moving, don't become hindered by your past. Don't hold on to the past. Let it go. Don't look back. Don't look down. Don't remember what and who and where and when. Instead, look at God. Look at your future and move forward. And third and final, know who you are and where you are in your processing. Know who you are and where you are in your processing. It's time to get out, get out. If you still have a way to go, move forward. But wherever you are in your process, keep moving. Don't stand still. It's time to get to the end of the processing. God bless you as we come to the end of another night's study. I want to encourage anyone who is not sure about their purpose. Look at the process, the problem, the purpose. The answer lies in it. For all of you who are still holding on to the past, it's still a hindrance in your life. It was a problem then, and you've left it behind, and you're making a problem now. Give it to Jesus. And if necessary, seek some counseling from godly men and women who can assist you along the way. Whatever you do, don't let it hinder your process or your pain or your plan. Finally, when you know the process is complete, get out. Listen to the voice of God. He will tell you when to move and what to do and how to use what's in you. The solution is often lies in you. Move forward. Thank you so much for joining me one more time on Let's Study the Word. Do subscribe on YouTube, where the messages are uploaded on a Thursday night, and like, share, and follow on Facebook, where the messages are uploaded on a Monday. Until next week, God bless you, love you, and goodbye. Move forward.